The night of our 10th anniversary was supposed to be a celebration, a decade of building a life, a home, a partnership. I, Elena Vance, had planned every detail. The restaurant was the same one where Leo had proposed, a little Italian place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in Chianti bottles. I wore the emerald green dress he'd once said made my eyes look like the sea. I'd even saved for months to buy him the vintage Rolex he'd always admired, a symbol of the time we'd shared. I arrived first, smoothing the tablecloth, my heart fluttering with a nervous hope. The last few years had been quiet. Leo had been distant, buried in his work, his phone always buzzing with some new urgent deal. I told myself it was just stress, that the man who'd written me love poems and brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning for years was still in there. When he arrived, he was handsome as ever in his charcoal suit, but his smile was tight, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for an exit. He didn't comment on the dress. He barely glanced at the wrapped watchbox. Through the appetizers and the wine, he was polite, distant. The conversation was a barren landscape of, "How was your day?" and "The pasta is good." The silence between us grew, thick and suffocating. My hope began to curdle into dread. Finally, as the waiter cleared our barely touched entrees, I reached across the table, my voice trembling. "Leo, please, talk to me. What's happening to us? It's our anniversary." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his gaze was colder than the ice in our water glasses. He leaned forward, his voice a low, brutal whisper meant for my ears alone. "Elena, let's not pretend anymore. This charade is exhausting." He took a slow sip of wine. "I only married you for the inheritance." The words didn't make sense. They bounced around my skull, meaningless and cruel. "The inheritance? What inheritance? Your parents didn't have any—" "Not my inheritance," he said, a faint, cruel smirk touching his lips. "Yours." I stared at him, utterly lost. "I don't have an inheritance. My grandmother left me that cottage. It's practically worthless." "The land, Elena," he said, as if explaining something simple to a child. "The 5 acres the worthless cottage sits on. It's smack in the middle of the proposed route for the new coastal highway expansion. The plans were drawn up 7 years ago. I found them in the town archives the year before I proposed." The room tilted, the candlelight blurred. My grandmother's cottage, my only haven, the place of childhood summers and the scent of rosemary and sea salt. You knew all this time?" "Of course I knew," he said, his voice flat. "I've been working with developers for 3 years. The deal closes next month. The payout is substantial, more than substantial." He pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the floor like a scream. "The 10 years were just the vesting period, a necessary inconvenience. Consider your part in this concluded." He stood up, threw a few bills on the table, enough for the meal, nothing more, and looked down at me. There was no remorse, no shame, just the cool satisfaction of a plan coming to fruition. "Don't embarrass yourself by making a scene," he said, echoing words I now realized had been the subtext of our entire marriage. "The lawyers will be in touch." And he walked out, just like that. He didn't look back. I don't remember paying the bill. I don't remember the drive home. I remember sitting in my car in our darkened driveway, watching the lights in his house go out one by one. I remember the weight of 10 years of love, of shared dreams, of laundry folded and dinners cooked and quiet nights on the sofa, collapsing into the crushing, empty reality of a business transaction. Tears came, hot and silent, but beneath them something else stirred, a deep, glacial fury. He thought I was a fool, a simple, loving fool to be used and discarded. He had taken my trust, my love, my youth, and ground it into dust for a real estate deal. I whispered into the dark interior of my car, "You only married me for the land, Leo. but you never really bothered to learn what was buried in it. I didn't go inside. I drove to the only place left that was truly mine, my grandmother's cottage. The cottage was dark and smelled of old wood and memories. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at my grandmother's worn kitchen table, the moon casting silver streaks through the window. Everyone thought Clara Vance was a sweet, slightly eccentric old woman who painted seascapes and grew heirloom tomatoes. Leo had certainly thought so. He'd humored her, called her Gran, but his eyes had always glazed over when she talked about the old stories of the land. He never listened, but I had. I went to the hearthstone, the one that looked slightly different from the others. With a grunt, I pried it up. Beneath it was not dirt, but a small, rusted metal strongbox. My grandmother had shown it to me when I turned 18, swearing me to secrecy. "For a true emergency, my darling girl," she'd said, her gnarled hand on mine. "The world is a greedy place. This is your anchor." Inside the box were no stock certificates or gold bars. There was a bundle of old letters tied with ribbon, a deed that looked centuries old, and a single official-looking report from a geological survey company, dated 40 years ago. I spread the report under the beam of my phone's flashlight. The technical jargon was dense, but the conclusion was clear. The survey, commissioned by my great-grandfather, had found a significant deposit of lithium-rich clay in a deep layer under the north section of the property. Lithium. The white gold of the modern era, critical for batteries, for electric cars, for the future. The estimated value, even 40 years ago, was staggering. The note clipped to it, in my grandmother's elegant script, read, "The world will want this one day, but land is life, not just currency. Sell only to someone who sees both. Protect it until then." Leo had seen the land as a path for cars, a highway to money. He never saw its true worth. He'd been so focused on the surface, he never thought to look beneath. A cold, sharp plan began to form in my mind. Leo wanted to sell my land to his developer friends. He couldn't, not without my signature. The cottage and the land were in my name, a gift from Gran, protected by a trust until I was 30. I'd turned 30 last year. The trust had dissolved, and in the blur of our strained marriage, I'd never gotten around to adding Leo's name to the deed. A profound oversight he must have been furious about, but was sure he could pressure me into correcting. He thought his deal was closing next month. He thought he held all the cards. But I held the mineral rights. And I had something else, evidence of his intent. The anniversary confession was one thing, but I needed more. I spent the rest of the night at the cottage, not sleeping, but thinking, planning. The heartbroken wife was gone. In her place was someone else. The next morning, I dressed simply and drove back into town. I didn't go home. I went straight to the offices of Hartman and Briggs, the oldest, most discreet law firm in the county. I asked for Samuel Briggs, who had been my grandfather's friend. I laid it all out for him, the anniversary, Leo's confession, the highway plans, and finally, the geological report. Sam's eyebrows crept higher and higher. He examined the deed and the mineral rights report with the reverence of an archaeologist. "Elena," he said finally, removing his glasses, "this changes everything. Not only does this make your property astronomically more valuable than any highway right-of-way, but Leo's admitted fraud, marrying you under false pretenses for financial gain, has serious legal implications. This is grounds for an annulment, not just a divorce. It would invalidate any claim he thinks he has." "I want to protect the land," I said, my voice steady, "and I want him to face what he's done." Sam nodded. "First, we secure everything. We file a preliminary injunction to stop any sale or development, citing the newly asserted mineral rights. We also," he added, a steely look in his eye, "file a criminal complaint for fraud. His confession is a start, but we'll need to subpoena his financial records, his communications with the developers. we'll bury him in paper until he confesses to the police just to make it stop. It felt ruthless. It felt necessary. While Sam began drafting the paperwork, I did one more thing. I called the lead developer on the highway project, a man named Carl Riggs. Using the calm, polite tone I'd perfected over a decade of being Leo's wife, I said, "Mr. Riggs, this is Elena Vance. I believe you're under the impression my husband has the authority to negotiate the sale of my property on Cliffside. Lane, I'm calling to inform you that he does not and never did. Furthermore, the land is not for sale at any price, as it contains protected mineral deposits. Any further contact regarding this matter should go through my attorney, Samuel Briggs." There was a long, stunned silence on the other end, followed by sputtered protests. I hung up gently. The dominoes began to fall faster than I could have imagined. By noon, Leo's world was imploding. Carl Riggs, furious at being misled and potentially sued, called Leo and unleashed a torrent of threats. The preliminary injunction hit the courthouse, and most importantly, Sam accompanied me to the police station to file the fraud report presenting Leo's confession and the financial motive as a clear-cut case of marriage fraud. At 3:17 p.m., I was sitting in Sam's office when my phone buzzed. It was a neighbor. "Elena, there are 2 police cars at your house. They're talking to Leo on the doorstep." What on earth is going on? I walked to the window. Our house wasn't far from the town square. I couldn't see it, but I could imagine it perfectly. Leo, confused and arrogant at first, then turning pale as the officers, explained they were there to question him regarding allegations of criminal fraud by deception. The neighbors watching from behind curtains, his perfect calculating facade cracking for all to see. Sam put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "They'll take him in for questioning. With the evidence we have, they'll likely press charges." I felt no triumph, only a vast, hollow exhaustion. The man I'd loved for 10 years was a stranger, and now a criminal. The life I'd known was a fiction, but as I looked out at the town, at the rolling hills that led to the sea and my grandmother's land, I felt the first flicker of something new. Not happiness, not yet, but sovereignty. Leo had whispered his cruel truth, thinking it was the end of my story. He never guessed it was the prologue to his own downfall, and he certainly never dreamed that the quiet, loving wife he'd planned to discard was standing on a fortune he couldn't even comprehend, ready to use it to build a future he would never be part of. The battle for the land and for my life was just beginning, and for the first time in a decade, I was holding the map. The news spread through our small coastal town like a summer wildfire, fanned by gossip and shock. "Leo Vance arrested for fraud." The local paper's headline was brutal. Below it, a photo taken by a neighbor showed him, pale and handcuffed, being led from my house. The article was scant on details, mentioning allegations of marriage fraud and disputed property, but it was enough. Perception, as Leo had once schooled me in a different context, was everything. My phone became a battleground. Half the messages were expressions of stunned support. "Elena, I can't believe it. Are you okay?" He always seemed too slick. The other half were veiled accusations or outright hostility from Leo's circle. "How could you do this to him?" "A wife's duty is to stand by her husband." One text, from a number I didn't know, simply read, "Gold digger." The irony was a bitter pill. He had mined me for gold, and I was the one labeled the digger. I stayed at the cottage. It was my fortress now. Sam Briggs had a locksmith change the locks on the townhouse and arranged for a colleague to accompany me to collect some clothes and personal items. Walking through those familiar rooms felt like walking through a museum of a life that had never been real. I took my grandmother's paintings, my books, the small, insignificant trinkets that were truly mine. I left everything that smelled of us. The legal machinery ground into motion. Leo was released on bail, courtesy of a slick, expensive lawyer from the city his developer friends had hired. His first move was not to apologize, but to attack. I received a formal notice from his attorney. Leo was countersuing for his share of the marital estate, including the appreciated value of the cliffside property during the marriage, and alleging I had committed emotional abuse and defamation. Sam just snorted when he read it. Standard intimidation. They're trying to muddy the water, make a settlement look attractive. They don't know about the lithium yet? We're holding that card close. But the defamation, I worried. Truth is an absolute defense, Elena, and we have the truth. We need to prove his intent. His confession to you is hearsay unless we can corroborate it. That corroboration came from an unexpected source, Maya, Leo's former assistant. She called me, her voice hesitant. Elena, I heard what happened. I need to talk to you. I can't keep quiet anymore. We met at a quiet park bench overlooking the harbor. Maya, always impeccably put together, looked frayed. I quit 6 months ago, she began, twisting a tissue in her hands. I couldn't take the ethical compromises. Leo, he had me do things. Set up shell emails to communicate with the developers. Draft memos that calculated the timeline of your marriage against the highway. Project's approval phases. He called it project vesting. She handed me a small encrypted flash drive. I copied files, emails, spreadsheets, calendar invites. It's all there. He was so arrogant he never thought I'd keep a record. It was the smoking gun, a digital trail detailing a decade-long conspiracy. Armed with Maya's files, Sam drafted a devastating civil suit. The allegations were now concrete. Fraudulent inducement to marry, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The demanded damages were astronomical, enough to swallow Leo's future earnings whole. Leo's response was not in court, but in person. He showed up at the cottage one evening, just as the sun was bleeding into the sea. He looked older, diminished, the cocky sheen completely gone. Elena, he said, his voice hoarse, can we talk, please? I didn't invite him in. I stood on the porch, the door firmly at my back. Say what you need to say. He ran a hand through his hair. This is a nightmare. The criminal charges, they could mean prison time. My lawyer says, with the evidence you have. He swallowed. I'm offering you a deal. You drop the criminal complaint. I'll sign a no-contest divorce, walk away from any claim to the land. Clean break. No more fighting. I stared at him, this stranger I'd shared a bed with. You think this is about the land? Leo, you didn't just take my land. You took 10 years of my life. You took my trust, my love, and you treated it like a business contract with a vesting period. You looked me in the eye every single day and lied. A flash of his old irritation surfaced. What do you want then? Blood? Money? You've got the damn land and whatever's under it. I want you to admit it, I said, my voice quiet and steady. To the police, to the court, to everyone. I want you to stand up and say, I, Leo Vance, married Elena solely to steal her inheritance, and I would have left her the moment the check cleared. I want the world to see the truth you whispered to me in that restaurant. His face hardened. You'll ruin me. You already ruined us, I replied. I'm just making sure the blueprint is visible. He left, his offer hanging in the salt air between us, already rejected. The lithium. It was time to understand its true worth. Sam introduced me to Dr. Eris Thorne, a renowned geologist and mineral economist. We met at the cottage, and I showed him the old report. His eyes widened as he read. This is remarkable. The survey methodology was primitive, but the findings are consistent with a geological formation we now know is incredibly rich. If this is accurate, Mrs. Vance. He looked at the land with new eyes. This isn't just a valuable deposit. This could be a strategic national resource. The mining technique for this type of clay is minimally invasive, especially compared to open-pit mining. It's environmentally sensitive. He proposed a new, comprehensive survey. The results, when they came back a few weeks later, were even better than the old report suggested. The deposit was larger, purer, and more accessible than my great-grandfather could have dreamed. Aris also brought another piece of news. "There's a company," he said, leaning forward. "Viridia Energy. They're a leader in sustainable lithium extraction. They don't just want to buy the mineral rights. They want to partner with landowners. They use a closed-loop, water-conserving process and have a strict policy of local benefit sharing and site restoration. They've been quietly optioning land in this region. I believe Leo's developer friends weren't just building a highway. They were a front, clearing the land cheaply before the mineral rush was public." The puzzle clicked into place. Leo hadn't just been a pawn. He'd been a cheap landman for a much bigger, greedier game, and he hadn't even known the full value of the prize. Leo, backed into a corner, played his dirtiest card. A blog appeared, anonymously authored, but clearly sourced from him. "The Bitter Wife's Revenge: How Elena Vance Destroyed a Man for Money." It was a masterpiece of distortion. It painted me as a jealous, cold woman who had trapped a successful man, then concocted wild stories when he grew distant. It mentioned my sudden, convenient discovery of mineral rights, implying I was the fraud. It played on every sexist trope in the book. The comment section was a sewer. My social media was flooded again. This time the vitriol was more organized, more vicious. I felt the ground of public opinion shifting beneath me once more. Truth was solid, but lies were louder. Sam urged restraint. "Don't engage. Every response fuels it." But Aris Thorne had a different idea. "You don't fight perception with argument," he said. "You fight it with a better story." He connected me with a PR firm that specialized in environmental and ethical narratives. Together, we crafted our response. Not a denial, a vision. We called a press conference at the town hall. I was terrified, but a new kind of steel had formed in my spine. I stood at the podium, not as Leo Vance's betrayed wife, but as Elena Vance, granddaughter of Clara Vance, steward of the cliffside land. I didn't mention Leo until the very end. First, I spoke of my grandmother, her love for the land, her foresight. I revealed the existence of the lithium deposit, not as a sudden get-rich-quick scheme, but as a legacy she had protected. Then I introduced a representative from Viridia Energy. He presented the partnership model, how a portion of the profits would fund a permanent land conservation trust, how the extraction would use revolutionary green technology, and how it would create high-skilled local jobs. He displayed renderings of the site, showing how the small footprint would be completely restored, even enhanced, after the resource was harvested. Finally, I turned to the elephant in the room. My voice didn't waver. Some have asked why I'm doing this now. The painful truth is that I was unaware of this legacy's full value until recently. I was deliberately kept in the dark by someone I trusted absolutely, my husband, Leo Vance. He married me under the false pretense of love, with the sole purpose of acquiring this land to sell it for a highway, unaware of the true treasure beneath it. I have filed criminal charges for this fraud. But today is not about him. It is about moving forward, honestly, ethically, and in a way that honors my family's legacy and benefits this community for generations. The story that hit the news that night was not Bitter Wife's Revenge. It was Local Woman Uncovers Secret Legacy, Forges Green Energy Partnership. The narrative had flipped completely. Leo was now a footnote, the greedy villain in a much larger, hopeful story. The pressure on Leo became immense. The criminal case, fortified by Maya's digital evidence, was solid. His high-priced lawyer began pushing for a plea deal. The civil suit loomed, promising financial ruin. And now, he was a pariah. The developers dropped him, fearing association with his toxic reputation. His friends evaporated. He made one last, desperate attempt. He showed up at Sam's office, demanding to see me. Sam relayed the message. He says he has information about who was really behind the development push. He says it's bigger than Riggs. I agreed to meet, on my terms, in Sam's conference room, with Sam present and with a court reporter to transcribe everything. Leo looked hollowed out. The highway deal. Riggs wasn't the principal. He was working for a holding company called Saltwater Investments. I never met the owners, The money, the instructions, it all came through layers. But I dug before everything went south. Salt water is a shell. Its ultimate beneficiary is the Kestrel Group. Sam went very still. The private equity firm? Leo nodded. They're the ones who knew about the lithium. The highway was just a cheap way to clear the title and get the land before anyone else caught on. Riggs and I, we were just useful idiots. He was giving up his masters to save his own skin. It was pathetic, but it was valuable. "Why are you telling us this?" I asked. His eyes met mine, and for a second I saw the ghost of the man I'd fallen for, lost and ashamed. "Because you were right. I owe you the truth, all of it, and I'm pleading guilty to the fraud charges next week. I'm going to prison, Elena. I just wanted you to know that I know what I threw away." There was no satisfaction in it, only a profound, weary sadness. With Leo's plea, the criminal case ended. He was sentenced to 18 to 36 months, a sentence that acknowledged his cooperation in uncovering the larger scheme. The civil suit was settled quietly. He signed away all claims to any asset in my name, present or future, in exchange for me not pursuing further financial damages that would follow him after prison. I was free, truly, legally, and emotionally free. The partnership with Viridia Energy moved forward. The contracts were signed, ensuring the land would be protected, the community would benefit, and I would retain ownership. The influx of capital was life-changing, but the real wealth was in the security and purpose it provided. I used part of the initial option payment to buy a small, sunny bungalow in town. The cottage remained mine, a sanctuary. I established the Clara Vance Foundation, funded by the partnership proceeds, dedicated to supporting single mothers and women in STEM fields, a nod to my past and my grandmother's secret scientific legacy. Eris Thorne became a constant presence. Our partnership was professional at first, focused on the land and the project. But over countless meetings, site walks, and conversations that stretched into evenings, it deepened. He was everything Leo wasn't. Genuine, curious, passionate about his work for its own sake, not for status. He saw the world in layers, both geological and human. One evening, as we reviewed reclamation plans at the cottage, he paused. "Elena, what you've done, it's extraordinary. You took a story of betrayal and rewrote it into one of stewardship. You didn't just get revenge, you built something new." "It didn't feel extraordinary," I said softly, looking out at the land. "It just felt like the next right thing, and then the next." "That's how the best foundations are built," he said, "not with grand gestures, but with one right choice after another." He hesitated, then reached out, his hand covering mine on the table. "I would very much like to be there for the next right things, if you'll have me." His hand was warm, solid, not a claim, but an offer. For the first time in over a decade, my heart didn't flinch in fear. It expanded, cautiously, with hope. It's been 2 years. The first phase of the Viridia project is underway, a model of quiet, efficient industry. The Clara Vance Foundation has its first class of scholarship recipients. My bungalow is filled with light, my grandmother's paintings, and the quiet happiness of a life lived authentically. Leo is up for parole soon. I bear him no active malice, only a distant pity. He is a lesson learned, not a ghost that haunts me. Today, Eris and I are walking the north ridge of the property. He's explaining a new soil analysis, his voice full of enthusiasm. I listen, but I'm also just watching the light on the sea, feeling the sturdy, patient earth beneath my feet. He finishes his point and smiles at me. "You're not even listening, are you?" "I am," I protest, laughing. "Lithium-ion pathways, cation exchange, it's fascinating." "You're a terrible liar," he teases, squeezing my hand. "But you're an excellent steward. We reach the highest point, where the land falls away to the craggy shore below. This is what was almost lost. This is what was saved. Not just the lithium, but my own soul. Leo's last words to me were meant to be the final, devastating blow. I only married you for the inheritance. He thought it was the end of my story. He was wrong. It was the beginning. It was the quake that forced me to look at the ground I stood on, to discover it wasn't sand, but bedrock. And on that bedrock, I am finally, joyfully, building a true and lasting life.